My name's Matt, I'm 34, and I've been married to Lisa, 32, for 8 years. On the outside, we were your typical suburban couple. I work in IT, Lisa's a freelance graphic designer. We met in college, bonded over our shared love of terrible 80s action movies, and tied the knot a few years later. For the longest time, I thought we were solid. Sure, we had our ups and downs. What marriage doesn't? But I genuinely believed Lisa was my partner, my ride or die. We have a 6-year-old daughter, Emma. She's the light of my life, the one person who makes me feel like I'm doing something right in this chaotic world. For her, I wanted to make this marriage work no matter what. But cracks started to show about a year ago. Lisa's temper got shorter, her patience thinner. She'd snap at me over the smallest things, like forgetting to unload the dishwasher or not putting the seat down. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Lisa's freelance gigs were drying up, and she hated feeling like she wasn't contributing enough financially. I tried to be understanding, supportive, the good husband. Then there were the lies. Small ones at first, like saying she was going to a friend's house when I'd later find out she'd gone shopping instead. Or claiming she didn't have time to help Emma with her school project, only for Emma to tell me she'd seen Mommy, just looking at her phone all afternoon. I should have paid more attention to these red flags. But I didn't. I didn't want to. I was clinging to the belief that Lisa and I were just in a rough patch, that things would go back to normal. I even started going to therapy, alone, to learn how to be a better husband. Then my dad got out of prison. Now, before you jump to conclusions, I need to explain. My dad, Ron, is a complicated man. He was in prison for fraud, not exactly a violent offender, but not a saint either. Growing up, he was one of those charming, larger-than-life personalities who could talk anyone into anything. My mom left him when I was 10, and I hadn't had much of a relationship with him since. But when he got released, he reached out, claiming he wanted to start fresh and make amends. Lisa wasn't thrilled about the idea of him being in our lives, but she didn't object too strongly. "He's your dad," she said. "If you want to give him another chance, who am I to say no?" Looking back, that should have been my first clue, because Lisa never cared about my dad before. In fact, she avoided the topic altogether. But suddenly, she was curious, asking about his life, his time in prison, his plans now that he was out. I thought she was trying to be supportive, but I was so wrong. Things got strange pretty fast once my dad, Ron, entered the picture. At first, it was little things. Lisa suddenly volunteering to drop off food at his place when I was too busy, or offering to run errands that somehow always involved going near his apartment. I didn't think much of it. If anything, I thought she was trying to help me reconnect with him, which felt unexpected, but not unwelcome. One night, though, it got weird. Lisa was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, laughing. I asked her what was so funny, and she said, "Oh, just a meme your dad sent me." That threw me. Why was my dad sending her memes? I mean, sure, they'd exchanged numbers for logistical stuff, but since when were they buddy-buddy? I asked her, "What's so funny that you couldn't just share it with me?" Lisa shrugged. "It's nothing, Matt. You wouldn't get it. It's one of those you had to be there jokes." That didn't sit right with me. Why would she have inside jokes with my dad? But I didn't press her on it. Not yet. The real tipping point came about a month later. It was late, and Lisa was working on a project in her office while I was putting Emma to bed. After Emma was asleep, I went to Lisa's office to say goodnight, but the door was closed. I could hear her voice through the door, laughing and whispering. But when I knocked, she went silent. "Hey, you okay in there?" I asked. "Yeah, just finishing up some notes," she replied, her voice oddly strained. When she finally opened the door, she looked flushed, her hair messy like she'd been running her hands through it. Her laptop was on the desk, but the screen was dark. She'd closed whatever she'd been working on. I stared at her for a moment, my gut screaming at me, but I didn't know what to say. I just kissed her on the forehead and said, "Don't work too late." The real bomb dropped 2 weeks later. I was cleaning out the garage when I found one of Lisa's old phones in a box. I don't even know what possessed me to turn it on. But I did. And of course, she hadn't wiped it. Her messages were still there. And that's when I found them. Texts. Hundreds of texts between Lisa and my dad. It started off innocently enough. He'd tell her jokes. She'd send him funny memes. But then it turned intimate. Dad, can't stop thinking about you. That dress you wore last week? Stunning. Lisa, you noticed, huh? Winky face. Don't tell Matt. Dad, our little secret. My hands were shaking as I scrolled further. The texts got worse, explicit, detailed, and unmistakably clear. She'd been sneaking out to meet him. Not just once, but multiple times. One message hit me like a punch to the stomach. Lisa, I love the way you make me feel. Matt never looks at me like that anymore. I dropped the phone, clattered to the concrete floor, but I couldn't move. My dad, the man who was supposed to be making amends, who I'd reluctantly allowed back into my life. And my wife, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world. I felt this cold, hollow numbness take over. Then the anger hit hot, blinding, and all-consuming. When Lisa got home that evening, I was waiting for her in the kitchen with the phone on the counter. She walked in with her usual carefree smile, but it vanished the second she saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice shaky. I didn't say a word. I just slid the phone across the counter. Her eyes widened as she realized what it was. For a moment, she froze, and then she did what Lisa always does when she's caught. She lied. "It's not what you think, Matt," she stammered. "Those messages. He was just joking around. It wasn't serious. You know how your dad is. He flirts with everyone." I laughed. A bitter, humorless laugh. "Flirting? Flirting. Lisa, you literally told him you loved the way he made you feel. You snuck out to see him." She crossed her arms and glared at me, her defensive walls snapping into place. "You know what? Fine. Yeah, we've been talking. But if you'd been paying attention to me, if you hadn't been so focused on your stupid job, maybe I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." Felt like she'd stabbed me in the chest. Couldn't even respond. I just stared at her, realizing for the first time how little she cared about the damage she'd done. "You're disgusting," I said finally. "And so is he." Her face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, grow up, Matt. You've always been such a Boy Scout. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to entertain myself." I walked out of the room before I could say, or do, something I'd regret. But in that moment, one thing became clear. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. After that confrontation, Lisa acted like nothing had happened. She didn't apologize, didn't try to explain further. If anything, she seemed annoyed at me, as though I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. Meanwhile, my dad? Radio silence. Not a single call or text from him. Guilt, maybe? Doubtful. Cowardice? Definitely. I spent the next few nights on the couch, pretending to Emma that Daddy was just watching TV late, so she wouldn't get scared. Lisa didn't care. She didn't even ask me to come back to the bed. But something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them humiliate me and walk away scot-free. No, this wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about justice, about revenge. And if there's one thing I learned from being Ron's son, it's how to think a few steps ahead. Lisa had her secrets, and now I was going to have mine. I started digging into her life. Every time she left her laptop open, I'd quietly copy files onto a USB drive. Emails, invoices, project notes, anything that might come in handy later. I even took photos of her personal planner, where she kept her freelance schedules and appointments. Then I hit pay dirt. While scrolling through her laptop one evening, I found something in her email drafts folder. A series of back-and-forth messages with a former client, Jason, who she'd done a design job for a few months back. Apparently, she'd charged Jason for a website redesign but had outsourced the whole thing to a sketchy third-party freelancer overseas for dirt cheap. Then she'd ghosted Jason when the site crashed and burned. He'd been furious, threatening legal action, but Lisa had ignored him. Couldn't believe it. My wife, the woman who prided herself on being independent and hardworking, had scammed someone, and she'd left the evidence lying around like she didn't even care. That's when the gears started turning. I tracked Jason down on social media and sent him a polite message, pretending to be a concerned friend of Lisa's. I told him I'd come across some documents that might help him if he wanted to pursue legal action. Naturally, Jason was interested. I forwarded him everything, copies of invoices, emails, screenshots of her notes. A few days later, I got a reply from him. Thanks for this. My lawyer will be in touch soon. Perfect. Next, I started looking into her finances. Lisa had always been secretive about money. She handled all her own accounts and rarely shared details with me. But over the years, I'd learned a few of her passwords. With those, I accessed her banking app and noticed a strange pattern. Every month, she'd been making cash withdrawals, small amounts, just enough to avoid suspicion. When I compared the withdrawal dates with her planner, I noticed they lined up suspiciously well with her errand days. Was she funneling money somewhere? To my dad? To someone else? I didn't know, but I planned to find out. One evening, while Lisa was in the shower, I took her phone and downloaded a tracking app onto it. I didn't feel great about it, but at this point, I didn't care. Sure enough, a week later, the app pinged her location. She wasn't at the grocery store like she claimed. She was at a motel on the other side of town. When she came home later that night, I didn't say a word. I just smiled and asked her how her day was. Fine, she said, not even looking at me. That's when I knew she didn't think I had the spine to do anything about her lies. She was wrong. But the final nail in the coffin came when I got a call from my dad. Hey, Matt, he said, his voice all casual, like nothing had happened. Just wanted to check in. How are things? I almost hung up on him, but then I had an idea. Things are fine, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. Lisa and I are actually doing better. Thanks for asking. Oh, that's great to hear, he replied, clearly relieved. I played along, chatting with him for a while, pretending to be over it. By the end of the call, he was comfortable enough to let something slip. He and Lisa had been meeting at that motel for weeks. That was all I needed to hear. At that moment, my plan solidified. I was going to make Lisa's life fall apart, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. I'm not proud of how dark my thoughts got in those days. But when someone betrays you on such a disgusting level, you stop thinking rationally. You want to burn everything down. I didn't just want Lisa to suffer. I wanted her to know it was me who set the fire. But revenge is a delicate thing. You can't rush it. It has to be precise like surgery. So I took my time laying the groundwork. First, I let Lisa believe I was backing down. I stopped sleeping on the couch and started being nice again. Bringing her coffee in the morning, asking about her work, even joking around like nothing was wrong. She bought it completely. She even started being more affectionate, like she was rewarding me for dropping the issue. I felt sick every time she touched me, but I let it happen. Let her think she'd won. Meanwhile, I was tightening the noose. The first part of my plan involved planting evidence. Lisa had been sloppy with her scams and her affair, but I wanted to make sure there was no wiggle room for her to explain her way out of this. One day, while she was out running errands, likely with my dad, I went into her office and used one of her graphic design programs to create some fake invoices. These ones tied her name and business to a fictional client, a company I made up, showing she charged them thousands of dollars for services she never delivered. I even added fake email chains to back it up. Then, I stashed the documents in a folder on her laptop, making sure to name it something boring like Tax Info 2023, so she wouldn't notice it. The second part of the plan was trickier, making her financial situation look worse than it already was. Remember those small cash withdrawals she'd been making? I started withdrawing similar amounts from our joint account, then depositing them back into an anonymous account I'd set up in her name. I made sure to use ATMs near places she frequented, so it would look like she was the one moving the money. Now came the piece de resistance, the motel setup. The tracking app I'd installed on her phone gave me an exact timestamp of every time she went to the motel. Using this, I was able to call the motel pretending to be her, saying I needed copies of my receipts for my expense records. Surprisingly, they handed them over without much fuss. Now I had proof she'd been paying for the room regularly. Finally, I called Jason, the guy she'd scammed with the website. His lawyer was already preparing to file a civil case against Lisa, but I hinted that the situation might be bigger than he realized. I told him I had documents tying Lisa to other shady dealings, and he should consider involving law enforcement. Jason didn't need much convincing. By the end of the call, he was fully on board. And just like that, the pieces were in place. All I had to do was light the match. The match came 2 weeks later, when I accidentally left my laptop open on the kitchen counter, with Lisa's incriminating documents displayed on the screen. Sure enough, she noticed. "Matt, what's this?" she asked, holding the laptop up like she'd caught me doing something wrong. "Oh, that," I said casually. "Just some stuff I came across while organizing our files. Looks like you've been busy." Her face went pale. "You've been snooping through my computer?" "Yeah, Lisa, I have." I shot back, letting some of my anger seep through. "And imagine my surprise when I found out you've been scamming clients. Not to mention the little love nest you've been renting out with my dad." She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For once, she didn't have a quick comeback. I leaned in close, my voice low and venomous. "This ends now. Either you confess to everything, or I take this to the police." She laughed nervously. "You're bluffing. You'd never go that far. And even if you did, you can't prove anything." "Oh, I can prove plenty," I said, pulling out the motel receipts. "And I've already sent copies to a lawyer. So, what's it gonna be?" That was the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. But she still tried to bluff her way out. "You're crazy, Matt. Nobody's going to believe you." I didn't say another word. I just walked out of the room, leaving her to stew in her panic. The next day, I made the call to the authorities. A week after I made the call, everything began to unravel, and fast. Jason had taken my advice and involved the authorities. Lisa was now facing accusations of fraud from her old client, and because of the additional evidence I had planted, her situation looked far worse than it already was. The paper trail I created made it appear as though Lisa had been running multiple scams over the past 2 years. To make things worse, I'd tipped off the IRS anonymously, flagging the money I'd funneled into her fake account as potential tax evasion. They were now sniffing around her finances, and she had no idea what was happening. Lisa's reaction to all this? Denial, of course. She was pacing the house, ranting about how someone's out to get her. She thought Jason was the one behind it all, and I didn't correct her. "They're trying to ruin me, Matt," she yelled one night, practically pulling her hair out. "This is a setup. I've never done anything illegal." "Oh, really?" I said, unable to resist. "What about that website job you pawned off on some cheap freelancer and then ghosted the client?" Her face twisted in fury. "That was one mistake, and it's not illegal. Besides, how do you know about that?" I shrugged. "You left your emails open, Lisa. Not very smart for someone who's supposedly innocent." Her jaw clenched, and for a split second, I saw something flash in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. She knew the walls were closing in. But the final blow came 3 days later when the police showed up at our door with a warrant. I'll never forget the look on Lisa's face as the officers explained the charges. Fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. She tried to argue, to plead, but they weren't interested. They confiscated her laptop, her phone, even some of her design equipment. "Matt, do something," she screamed as they cuffed her. "This is a mistake. You know I didn't do any of this." I just stood there, arms crossed, watching her fall apart. "You lied to me, Lisa. You lied about everything. Why should I help you now?" Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the text she sent my dad, the motel receipts, the sheer audacity of her betrayal. That guilt evaporated in an instant. They took her away, and the house fell silent. But I wasn't done yet. With Lisa out of the house, you'd think I'd feel some relief. But there was still one loose end, the man who was supposed to be my father, Ron. He'd gone quiet after the fallout with Lisa. I hadn't heard from him since that one phone call where he'd smugly let it slip that they'd been meeting at the motel. Maybe he thought he could disappear into the background, avoid any consequences. He thought wrong. The thing about my dad is that he's a creature of habit. He doesn't learn from his mistakes. He just finds new ways to repeat them. I knew he'd probably been running his own scams while cozying up to Lisa. The man can't help himself. So, I decided to find out exactly what he'd been up to. The first step was getting into his apartment. I still had a spare key from when he first got out of prison and stayed with us briefly. One Saturday, I waited until I was sure he'd be out. He spends every weekend playing cards at a dingy bar across town, and let myself in. The place was a mess. Empty beer bottles, piles of unopened mail, and a distinct smell that screamed, poor life choices. But I wasn't there to judge his housekeeping skills. I was looking for dirt. And boy, did I find it. Stuffed in a shoebox under his bed were stacks of documents. Fake IDs, burner phone receipts, and what looked like records of fake investment schemes he'd been running online. There were even handwritten notes that detailed how he'd been stringing along multiple women for money. Women who, from the tone of their messages, thought they were in serious relationships with him. But the real jackpot? A notebook with detailed entries about his adventures with Lisa. Some of it was mundane, dates and locations of their meetups, but there were also entries about how they'd laughed at my expense. Lisa says Matt is such a pushover. Poor guy has no idea what's going on right under his nose. Meeting at the motel again. Lisa brought wine this time. She's worried Matt's getting suspicious, but I told her he's too much of a loser to figure it out. I sat on the edge of his bed, flipping through page after page of their betrayal. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for anger. This was the time for strategy. I took photos of everything. Every ID, every note, every incriminating piece of paper. Then I left his apartment exactly as I'd found it and went home to figure out my next move. The idea came to me that night. If Ron wanted to scam people, I'd let him. But I'd make sure he scammed the wrong person. Using one of the fake IDs I'd found, I created an online profile for a wealthy widow looking for investment opportunities. I used AI to generate a fake photo, created a backstory, and sent Ron a message on one of the dating platforms he frequented. It didn't take long for him to bite. Within 2 days, he was messaging Margaret nonstop, spinning his usual web of lies about being a self-made entrepreneur looking for the right partner to share his success with. I played along, pretending to be intrigued by his investment pitch. He even sent me his fake business documents to prove he was legit, which I immediately forwarded to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, along with everything else I'd found in his apartment. It was almost too easy. A month later, Ron was arrested in a sting operation. Turns out, the feds had been building a case against him for years, and my evidence was the final nail in the coffin. He's facing multiple charges now: fraud, identity theft, and money laundering, just to name a few. When I saw the mugshot online, I felt nothing.
No satisfaction, no sadness.
Just emptiness. With Ron out of the picture, I thought things might settle down. But Lisa, true to form, wasn't going to go down without a fight. Even from behind bars, she managed to make my life miserable. She started calling me collect from jail. The first time, I let it go to voicemail. But when she kept calling over and over, I finally picked up, mostly out of curiosity. "Matt, you have to help me," she said. Her voice panicked. "They're saying I did all this illegal stuff, but I didn't. You know I didn't. Tell them, Matt. Tell them it's all a misunderstanding." I stayed silent for a moment, letting her squirm. "Lisa, do you think I'm stupid?" I said finally. "You scammed people, cheated on me with my dad, and lied to my face for years. Why on earth would I help you?" "Because I'm still your wife," she snapped. "And we have a child together. You're just going to let Emma grow up knowing her mother's in prison? What kind of father are you?" The audacity of her to try to guilt me after everything she'd done was almost laughable. "Emma's going to grow up knowing the truth," I said coldly. "That her mother is a liar, a cheater, and a criminal. And that her father did what was necessary to protect her from that." That shut her up, at least for a few seconds. "You're lying," she hissed, her tone shifting to something venomous. "You set me up, didn't you? All those documents, they weren't mine. You planted them. I knew it. I didn't deny it. I wanted her to know, without me outright saying it, that this was my revenge. Goodbye, Lisa." I said before hanging up. After that, the calls kept coming, but I never answered again. She started writing letters, 2 long, rambling ones where she alternated between begging for forgiveness and threatening to expose me. I didn't respond to those either. Meanwhile, the legal case against her was moving forward. Jason's lawyer had brought overwhelming evidence of fraud to the table, and the IRS wasn't far behind with their own charges. Lisa had no real defense, especially since the planted documents made it look like she'd been running scams for years. One day, I got a call from her lawyer, who asked if I'd be willing to testify on Lisa's behalf as a character witness. I nearly laughed out loud. "Absolutely not," I said. "In fact, if you call me again, I'll make sure the court knows exactly what kind of character she really is." After that, I didn't hear from her lawyer again. A few months later, Lisa took a plea deal. She agreed to serve 5 years in prison in exchange for a reduced sentence and the promise not to fight additional charges from the IRS. When I heard the news, I felt nothing.
No joy, no sadness.
Just a strange sense of finality. But that wasn't the end of Lisa's downward spiral. Apparently, word got around the prison about how she cheated on me with her father-in-law. One of the guards even leaked it to some inmates, and Lisa became the target of constant harassment. She wrote me another letter, begging me to do something to help her, but I tore it up without reading it all the way through. She'd made her choices. Now she was living with the consequences. After Lisa was sentenced, the dust finally started to settle. The house felt eerily quiet without her around. No constant bickering, no passive-aggressive remarks, no fake smiles. At first, it felt good, peaceful, but then reality started to sink in. I was now a single dad. Emma had questions, ones I wasn't fully prepared to answer. "Where's Mommy?" she asked one night at bedtime, her big brown eyes staring up at me. It was the question I'd been dreading. I knelt beside her bed, choosing my words carefully. "Mommy had to go away for a little while, sweetie. She made some bad choices, and now she has to take responsibility for them." Emma frowned, her little face scrunching in confusion. "But when is she coming back?" I hesitated. "Not for a long time," I said softly. "But you've still got me, okay? I'll always be here for you." She nodded slowly, though I could tell she didn't fully understand. And how could she? She was only 6. For the first few weeks, I threw myself into being the best dad I could be. I took Emma to the park, helped her with her school projects, and made pancakes on Sunday mornings. Something Lisa used to do. But no matter how hard I tried, there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. The betrayal still haunted me. At night, when Emma was asleep, I'd sit in the living room replaying everything in my head. The texts, the lies, the smug look on Ron's face when he thought he'd gotten away with it. It was like a poison I couldn't purge. I started therapy again, but this time I was honest with my therapist. I told her everything. Lisa's affair, the revenge, how I'd framed her and sent her to prison. I expected her to be horrified, but she wasn't. "You're human," she said simply. "You were hurt and you reacted. But now that it's done, the question is, how do you move forward?" That stuck with me. Moving forward. One thing was clear: I needed a fresh start. I put the house on the market. There were too many bad memories tied to it. Lisa's presence lingered in every room, and I couldn't stand it anymore. Within a few months, I sold the house and moved to a smaller place closer to my job. It wasn't as big, but it felt like a clean slate. I also cut off all contact with Ron's side of the family. As far as I was concerned, I didn't have a father anymore. Surprisingly, the move and the distance helped. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again. I reconnected with old friends, went back to the gym, and even joined a local co-ed softball league. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life. But the biggest change was Emma. She became my anchor, my reason to keep going. Every laugh, every hug, every bedtime story reminded me that there was still good in the world. Good worth fighting for. And yet, despite all the progress I'd made, there was still one unresolved question gnawing at me. What would I do if Lisa ever came back? 2 years passed and life finally felt stable. Emma was thriving in school. I'd gotten a promotion at work, and for the first time in forever, I wasn't waking up every day with anger weighing me down. I thought I'd put everything behind me. Then Lisa wrote me another letter. I almost threw it out, like all the others she'd sent before. But curiosity got the better of me. Her tone was different this time. Not the pleading, guilt-tripping nonsense I'd come to expect. This letter was quieter. Resigned. Matt, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I ruined everything. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, how I betrayed you and destroyed our family. It wasn't just about the affair, though that was unforgivable. It was about my selfishness, my lies, and how I let you shoulder all the weight while I spiraled out of control. You were a good husband, a better man than I deserved. I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, truly sorry, for all of it. I'm getting out in a few months. I don't expect you to let me back into your life, but I hope, for Emma's sake, we can find a way to coexist.
Lisa.
I reread the letter 3 times, trying to figure out if it was genuine or just another manipulation. Part of me wanted to believe she was sincere, that prison had finally humbled her. But another part of me, the part that remembered her sneering face when she blamed me for her affair, was skeptical. I didn't respond. When her release date came, I didn't tell Emma. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, and I wasn't about to let Lisa stroll back into our lives without proving she'd changed. A week after her release, she showed up at my door. I opened it to find her standing there, looking thinner, older, and more tired than I'd ever seen her. Her once meticulously styled hair hung limp around her face, and her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. "Matt," she said softly, as though testing the waters. "What do you want, Lisa?" I asked, my tone cold but calm. I wanted to see Emma," she said, shifting nervously. "I'm not asking to stay or anything. I just want to see my daughter." I didn't let her in. Instead, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You don't get to just walk back in like nothing happened," I said. "You think a letter and a couple of apologies erase the damage you caused?" "I'm not asking for that," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve your trust, and I know I'll probably never earn it back. But Emma's my daughter, too. Doesn't she deserve to know her mother? She deserved a mother who didn't lie, cheat, and destroy her family." I shot back. Lisa flinched like I'd slapped her. I know I failed her. And you. But I'm trying to be better, Matt. I've been in therapy, I've been working on myself. I'm not the same person I was. I didn't know whether to believe her. I didn't want to believe her. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the tiny voice in the back of my head. The one that said Emma deserved the chance to make her own decision about her mother. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. "Here's what we're going to do," I said finally. "I'll let you see Emma, but it's going to be on my terms. Supervised visits only. If I see even a hint of your old behavior, it's over. You disappear for good. Got it?" Lisa nodded quickly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Matt. I swear, I'll do whatever it takes." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "You've got a long way to go before I even think about trusting you again." She wiped her eyes and gave me a small, sad smile. "I understand. I'll prove it to you." And just like that, Lisa was back in our lives. Tentatively, carefully, and under my strict watch. Reintroducing Lisa into Emma's life was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to keep her out for good. But I wasn't doing this for Lisa. I was doing it for Emma. She deserved the chance to know her mother, even if I couldn't stand the sight of her. Our first supervised visit took place at a local park. Lisa showed up early, nervously pacing by the swings. When Emma saw her, she froze. "Is that Mommy?" she whispered, gripping my hand tightly. "Yes," I said softly. "She wanted to see you." Emma let go of my hand and ran toward Lisa, hesitating a few feet away. Lisa dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she held out her arms. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling. Emma stared at her for a long moment before finally stepping forward and wrapping her arms around her. "I missed you, Mommy." Lisa sobbed openly, holding Emma like she was afraid to let go. I stood a few feet away, watching the scene with mixed emotions. Part of me hated Lisa for what she'd done, but another part of me, deep down, was relieved that Emma seemed happy, at least for now. The visit went well, all things considered. Lisa was on her best behavior, focusing entirely on Emma and avoiding any unnecessary interaction with me. When it was time to leave, Emma asked if she could see her mommy again soon. I nodded, telling her we'd plan another visit. Over the next few months, we established a routine. Lisa would see Emma once a week, always supervised, either at the park or a neutral location like a library. She never overstepped, never pushed for more. She seemed determined to prove she could be a better person, though I still kept my guard up. During one visit, Lisa pulled me aside while Emma was playing. "I just wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it." "I'm not doing it for you," I replied, my tone icy. "I'm doing it for Emma. Don't forget that." "I won't," she said, nodding solemnly. "I promise." Despite my reservations, I started to see subtle changes in Lisa. She was no longer the arrogant, self-absorbed person I'd known before. Prison had humbled her, or at least that's what it seemed like. Meanwhile, I continued rebuilding my own life. I started dating again, though I kept it low-key and never introduced anyone to Emma. My focus was on creating a stable, happy home for her, free of the chaos and betrayal that had defined the last few years. Eventually, Lisa asked if we could expand her time with Emma, unsupervised visits, maybe even overnights. I told her I'd consider it, but only after I was confident she could handle it. To her credit, Lisa didn't argue or push. She simply nodded and said, "I'll wait as long as it takes." And for once, I believed her. Reflection. Looking back, I never thought I'd be in this position, co-parenting with the woman who had destroyed my trust and betrayed me in the worst way possible. If you told me 2 years ago that I'd ever let Lisa back into my life, I would have laughed in your face. But here's what I've learned. Life isn't black and white. People can change, but that doesn't mean they deserve your trust or forgiveness. It just means you have to decide what's best for yourself and the people you love. For me, the priority will always be Emma. I don't know if Lisa and I will ever truly be on good terms, but I do know that I'll never let her hurt Emma the way she hurt me. And as for my dad, he's still rotting in prison where he belongs. Some wounds never fully heal, but I've come to accept that. Life goes on. If you're reading this and you've been through something similar, here's my advice. Don't let betrayal define you. Take your time, rebuild, and do what's best for you and your family. And never, ever let someone like Lisa or Ron steal your peace.